shit. I know I laced it with blood.
It is with great respect and decorum and, quite frankly, the utmost reverence that I'm personally capable of that I say this. Fuck the Mormon faith. Yep, bet you didn't see that one coming. The Mormon faith, one of my least favorite groups of people. Actually, that's not even necessarily a true statement, because when you do say something like, fuck this group or fuck that group, it's very important to remember that unless you're a Klans member, what you're trying to say is fuck an ideology. You're not trying to say fuck the people susceptible to an ideology, because, quite frankly, every single person is susceptible to ideology because minds are deceivable, and there are some people who are highly intelligent and then use that intelligence for good or evil, and then, manipulate people into subscribing to their ideology, which in a lot of times, unless it's a truly authentic and altruistic school of thought, is just another means to exploit people. So it is with that I would like to call attention to my favorite theocratic state in our great nation, or republic, I should say, the state of Utah. So Utah recently has gotten on board with the rest of the known civilized universe with adopting a medical marijuana policy. Now, most of the country, in the United States at least, has pretty recently, over the last decade or so, kind of warped their opinion on marijuana, because it originally, there's been a lot of effort over the last 100 years or so to really guide and direct the general public as to how to feel about everything, quite frankly, but specifically marijuana, dating back to William Randolph Hearst, Reefer Madness, blah, 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 up until NWA told everyone, light that shit up, homie, right? Anyway, so Utah, which is for some reason allowed to operate as a state masquerading as a state when in fact is quite literally a theocracy, that is thanks to none other than everyone's favorite group of dummies, gullible dummies, quite frankly. I'm sorry, I can't bite my tongue anymore. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they make up 60% of the population in Utah. However, they make up 90, you heard that right, with a 9, 90% of the legislative body in Utah. So essentially, if you want to get a law passed in Utah, you have to be a Mormon. And the Mormon church works similar to an oligarchy in that you're told what to think, and if you have a new idea, you have to bring it to those approved in power, the very small group of people at the motherfucking top, and you say, hey guys, I have a new idea or a question, something like that. And that what they will do is kill you and marry all your wives and sell off some of them for the fattest calf and a good chunk of land. But in Utah, one of the last states holding out on medical marijuana for a variety of reasons, they've recently, over the last couple weeks or so, have officially pushed forward a bill that will make medical marijuana legal in the state of Utah, with a few exceptions. You will only be allowed to vape it. You're not allowed to smoke it. It's going to be extremely difficult to get a prescription, and all of that's fine. Think what you want to think about marijuana. It's a drug, obviously, because anything that changes your biological makeup is a drug. Now, is it as dangerous as, say, heroin or crystal meth? I think by now we can all pretty much say, unless you're William Randolph Hearst, that it is not, because it is a plant. If it was so dangerous, why would it just show up naturally? If everyone in the world didn't even know what marijuana was, right, it would still be here. It would still exist. If we just fucking took a hands-off approach, which is something we should do a lot more often, and just let plants grow, some of those plants would be marijuana. Now, that is not to say there is no negative for it, because like any other drug, there's obviously a negative potential for it, because just kind of like guns, for example, right? Like marijuana doesn't kill people, but there are people who are not supposed to or are not biologically capable of having marijuana because of a variety of reasons. People have addictive personalities. You can develop a mental dependency on something. Because, in the same way that, like, guns don't kill people, because guns can't pull the trigger themselves. Someone has to pull that trigger. Now, does that mean we shouldn't have guns? Depending on who you ask, yes. The answer to that is yes. And usually the people saying that are the ones with a privately outfitted security detail. But to the marijuana point, think what you want to think. It's a drug in the same way, caffeine's a drug, in the same way nicotine's a drug. That being said, I tend to lean on the side of individual choice, and if it is something you'd want to do, as an American, you have a right to put it in your body. That is not the belief of Mormons, because the Mormon Church, which I've really done like a 180 on over the last, I'll say, year or so, has, let's just say they have a history of telling people what to think, to put it mildly, right? So if you are a Mormon, a lot of Mormons don't drink coffee. They don't take aspirin. There is almost like a Jehovah's Witness level of anti-drug sentiment, even good drugs, even prescription drugs within the community. Now, if you were like me, easily persuaded and just generally had a good heart and wanted to assume the best about people, you probably thought the Mormons were just, another branch of Protestantism that had similar looking churches with smaller parking lots, probably a little bit more lively music than your Catholic church. And we're just, generally decent people who, were actually pretty friendly if you met a Mormon. Bryce Harper is a Mormon. Sorry to out you, Bryce, but you should probably hear this. Turns out that's not the motherfucking case, because if you do even a little bit of research on these Mormons, or the Mormon faith, or particularly the person who started Mormonism, I should say, that would be Joseph Smith, right? So Joseph Smith, who, despite having a name that clearly was taken from, the terrorist watch list or the do not fly list, was one of history's, or at least our American country's, greatest liars and master manipulators, right? So Joseph Smith was born in upstate New York in like the mid 1800s. Now, while he was, being a fucking kid in the 1800s up in upstate New York, he was actually arrested in his teenage years for essentially being like a swindler, a liar, aka what they used at the time was a glass looker. Now, while that may sound like a hilarious racial slur for some country, I'm going to let you decide in your head which one you think it may be. What it really meant was, like I said, a drifter, grifter, swindler, a liar. He was actually arrested for false treasure hunting, which, there were some really weird laws on the books back then. Like, I believe in, like, Mississippi, you weren't allowed to sleep outside on the top of a refrigerator or something. Fact check me on that. But he was arrested for literally lying about treasure hunting. Literally lying about discovering treasures, right? Now, keep that in mind when you now consider the origin story, the self-proclaimed origin story of the Mormon Church itself, right? So the story goes, the white teenager named Joe Smith, who was up in upstate New York, magically one day was visited by the Archangel Michael, who was then instructed to go out into the woods, find this one specific plot of land, get to motherfucking digging, and then eventually what you're going to find are a couple of gold-plated tablets, which, apart from the obvious literal weight of such tablets, which would be almost impossible for a 14-year-old boy to carry, let alone carry motherfucking two of them, he was essentially chosen by God to right all the wrongs of the church of old and bring about the new right church, the one that God wanted. And this white teenager from New York named Joe Smith was chosen to do that, right? So he finds, believe it or not, coincidentally, because of all his treasure hunting experience, he actually finds the spot where these gold tablets are buried in upstate New York, which at some reason or another apparently played a big role in God's creation of the universe. So he takes this information, he goes back to his family, and he says, hey guys, how was your day? How was your day in, the 1800s in New York? And his dad said, it was good. And his mom wasn't allowed to speak. And then his dad said, hey, Joe Jr., how was your day? And then he probably told his dad something like, it was pretty good, Dad. I was just going about my day, got up pretty early, did some calisthenics, went treasure hunting. And then the Archangel Michael just showed up and, unannounced, like we didn't have anything on the books. And he said, hey, Joey, I want you to start the real church of God and go out into the woods and find the gold tablets that had the commandments on them. Is that cool? And then Joe Smith Sr. was like, wow, I should completely abandon my life of agnosticism and follow my son's budding new philosophy. Fast forward a little bit. Joe Smith Jr. then starts to tell a few more people about his crazy weekday in upstate New York with the Archangel and the gold tablets. A few of those people start to believe him about Joe Smith talking about his crazy day in upstate New York with the Archangel and finding the golden tablets. They tell a few people. I'm not going to say it a third time. But as you know how exponents work, right? So eventually, because there was no television back then, people's minds were captivated. And this was a time of great religious upheaval, right? Because around the 1800s was when we see a lot of Protestant denominations kind of coming into their own, getting themselves new titles, getting new uniforms, adopting very strict facial hair regulations, things of that nature. So you go forward a couple of years, Joe finally has enough people to qualify as a church, right? For lack of, in this instance, don't even think the word applies, but for argument's sake, we'll say a church. It gets so big that the rest of the people in upstate New York who apparently either had television at the time or could literally, determine that the 14-year-old boy arrested for treasure hunting is probably lying, decided that I'm not going to believe this, and the fact that you keep getting people to believe this is kind of starting to freak me out. So I suggest you fucking leave. And that's exactly what all of his followers did, and they started to emigrate out west. Just manifest destiny, right? So they head west, they get to Ohio, which is really one of the worst fucking states in Yankee country, right? Because generally speaking, most southern states I don't really need to go to. Like, I don't ever need to step foot in goddamn Mississippi because, like, whoever needs to step foot in goddamn Mississippi? So they make it out into Ohio. They meet the aliens on the base, blah, 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 and they start to lay some foundations. The Mormon church really gets going out there. And then the good people of Ohio, who put up with some weird shit. I mean, there are some of the weirdest stories that you could ever find take place in Ohio. Even these people were like, you're weird. All y'all's people is weird. Get to stepping. So they hightail it on down to Missouri, the gates of the West, right? So they do the same thing there. Not long after, they get very upset because Missourians were, once again, not down for a 14-year-old religious prophet who was probably lying with an arrest record about making shit up. And it gets to the point where there actually ends up being a bit of a skirmish, a military-ish type battle where some people die. And it was during this time that the Joseph Smith, the homie, while he was, preaching the good word of God and telling people what truly God actually wanted and, essentially how to live your life, right? He gets so fed up with people not accepting his good news that at this time, he ordered some of his followers to try and assassinate the governor of Missouri at the time. They did not succeed because, God, why, that would be horrible if that was actually true and that worked throughout history. So once again, they get kicked out of Missouri, right? Because states tend to not take kindly to lying teenagers with plans to assassinate the governor. And at this point, they finally make it all the way out into Utah, which is, geographically speaking, isolated. It's a beautiful state. I mean, Coeur d'Alene. Have you ever? My goodness. Anyway, so they get out there, and they finally found a home because there was no one out there already for them to lie to, minus a few Native Americans who they slaughtered, but we'll move past that. And then they essentially create a theocracy. Now, they were one of the last states to officially be ratified and become a state, which unfortunately carried over a lot of the Mormons there. So then they pretended to adopt, every other system of government that our states have. The only thing is they were, and to this day, 90% of the legislators, the elected officials in the state of Utah, are Mormon, devoutly Mormon. There's not a lot of mild or, half Mormons in the way like Catholics are, for example, which means that their allegiance is not ultimately, in fact, they don't even literally believe in the separation of church and state. Like one of Joseph Smith's craziest beliefs is that Jesus was a white, tall person born in America, and that America is God's chosen country. Now, apart from that making quite literally no sense at all, other than the fact Jesus was a tall white guy, because, come on, do we really want a short brown Jesus? I don't think so. Satire, people, to be very clear. So he has all these ideas, right? And he says, this is where we're supposed to be. This is essentially my Israel devoid of brown people. We'll get to why he hates brown people later. All of the people still in this day in 2021 don't even believe in the separation of church and state, and they're democratically elected officials, quote unquote. I give you all of this background and information to essentially explain what I went through recently with doing my own research, is that there are any group that is, for it may be extreme, but any group that is evil or nefarious, because that's a more intellectual word for evil that people can tolerate, a lot of times they're made up of smart people who are using their intelligence for not necessarily good. And they have the wherewithal to kind of disguise what their goals are, because good people, and I generally think most people are good people, don't like, evil shit. So what they do is dress it up. They make it look like we're a good organization. They even literally use Jesus Christ's name in the title of Latter-day Saints, implying that they themselves, those true believers, are the actual Latter-day Saints, right? So that makes no sense right out of the gate, because if you look at it, what evil or nefarious or bad, whatever tolerable, palatable word you want to use for wrongdoers is, all of these people, something that they have in common is the fact that they do not reveal what their true intentions are. And that is evident just by looking at, let's say, the symbolism involved in Mormonism. Most of it is just cherry-picked stuff from the Bible, primarily also Freemasonry, the symbolism. Little known fact, I think it was the first 6 heads of the Mormon Church were all devout Freemasons, including Joe Smith Sr., who was his father, who was an agnostic Freemason. Anyway, so what they do is, in order to create this thing that feels and looks and almost smells and tastes like a church, is literally take all of the elements associated with genuine churches and just kind of create a smorgasbord of charcuterie bullshit that will have the average person simply in awe of how tall your building is, and then join and pay 25% tithes on top of a Utah state income tax, mind you, and just devoutly listen to anything the group of leaders at the top of the church tell them to do. Now, whether that be not reporting instances of crime to the local authorities, or having senior members of the church interrogate younger children about their masturbation practices. And if that was a jarring sentence, imagine how jarring it was to read for the first time. But that is genuinely something that happens. And that's not even getting in to the church's original background with polygamy. Now, polygamy, for those of you who think that is something to do with like rhombuses or equilaterals, I assure you it is not. It's the definition for people who have more than one wife. And if you notice and you look into people who practice polygamy, it's never like one badass chick who's like, a COO at some top firm or anything like that, who has 18 simp cuck husbands, because it never goes that way. It's always one dude who's a farmer who just wants to fuck a lot of people. Come on, like you can't have more than one wife, maybe 2, at absolute 2. But you can't have as many as you want. That's just not right. And in the people who still in the Mormon Church practice polygamy, they at least had the decency to break off and start the FLDS, head down to New Mexico, and fuck the livelong day away out in the desert. I mean, shout out Warren Jeffs for at least having the goddamn decency to be a piece of shit publicly. And I mean that in all sincerity, truly. But I digress. So, in terms of the marijuana law, right, the Mormon Church kind of, whether they want to admit it or not, I guess, realized that they are part of the United States, and the United States sentiment around marijuana, especially medical marijuana, has undoubtedly tipped over the 51% mark, right? Everyone's kind of on board and acknowledges that there are medical benefits if you're going through cancer. I also read a couple weeks ago that marijuana can have certain anti-degenerative effects on the brain that can prevent Alzheimer's and things of that nature. So the church, I guess, realized eventually, if you can't beat them, join them, but let's make sure we get ahead of it first and then kind of pretend to join them so we can make up our own rules that sound similar to the real rules, but ultimately we're still the ones calling the shots, which is exactly what they did. So apart from the fact that they are going to pass a medical marijuana bill, it's going to have some of the strictest laws and requirements attached to it. And I say all this to just highlight hypocrisy, for lack of a better word. Actually, that's probably the best word to choose here, because there's nothing that I hate more, and believe me, I'm so guilty myself of being a hypocrite, because it's easy to be a hypocrite, for one. But in my mind at least, there's 2 different versions of hypocrisy. There's the one that I think most people fall victim to, where it's just generally, it's more convenient. it's just easier sometimes because it's hard to have a backbone and integrity all the time and stick up for what you believe, because the beliefs of the general public are always changing because there's probably a few people at the top deciding what they should be. But apart from that, the other type of hypocrisy is this public-facing, lying, manipulative, deceitful, planned out, almost like first-degree murder type hypocrisy, where it's strategically implemented and kind of disguised, almost like Mormonism. But it's insidious. It's a horrible thing. It's really, really, really evil, because you have to be true to your word, because like we talked about in the last episode, you don't got shit other than that, right? It's not like money's real. Grow up, face facts. Bitcoin is not going to buy you a meal when you're homeless and default on the house you just bought with a low-interest loan you won't be able to afford when hopefully everything gets back to normal. That's why your word has to be motherfucking infallible, because if it is not, you are no different than a goddamn dog. And I mean that truly, because, actually, you know what? I actually take that back, because a dog is genuine as fuck all the time. It's cats, motherfucking cats, who look disingenuous and up to some shit, right? I mean, honestly, like, you come home, a dog is happy to see you at every given moment. He is your best friend. The second you leave, all he does is wait for you to come home. You come home to a cat, that cat doesn't give a motherfuck. That cat doesn't pay rent. If you were to die in your sleep, that cat would eat you. Hand to God, I guarantee it. But that was a bit of a digression. I hate cats, love dogs, and I'm scared of birds. But hypocrisy is something that I think I don't know if we're seeing more of it because of social media and the internet, and everyone is aware of pretty much everything now all the time, or if it's really been ramped up. Because, like, let's take, for example, Kamala Harris, right? She recently went to Ecuador and was greeted with signs saying, "Get the fuck out of Ecuador," shout at Ecuador. But she went down there. For some reason, unbeknownst to myself, she decided to fly to a country that didn't want her there, and then told everyone in that country, "Do not come to America," which, based on their literal signs greeting them at the airport, didn't want to in the first place, right? So then Harris gives a speech, and she warns. Actually, let me do something like this. I want to highlight how visibly apparent hypocrisy is. So the Washington Post, when Kamala Harris went down to Ecuador, the headline to their article about the meeting and the trip there reads, and I quote, "Harris warns Guatemalans that they will be turned back if they come to the U.S. border illegally." Now, no one would really be mad at that, right? Because regardless of how you feel about immigration, and I mean, in the deepest sense, there aren't really no countries in a way, because it's not like there's actual real borders. The only real borders are like lakes, rivers, geographic shit like that, the Grand Canyon. There aren't actual lines of demarcation in the sand anywhere. You can't go to Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado and see those 4 lines where they all intersect. You can just go there and visit the aliens. But anyway, there's really not borders. But at the same time, like with money, we live in a polite society. So we need to, subscribe to certain rules. Otherwise, it would be fucking chaos, which I'm starting to think a lot of people are just trying to instigate. So the Washington Post gives definitely a fair headline to what Kamala said, that, hey, there are immigration laws in our country, and we have to enforce them because those are laws, and in theory, we all follow the law, right? Fast forward a couple years ago. I'm not even going to correct that, because if you know, you know. But a couple of years ago, back when Trump went down to Ecuador, this is what the Washington Post said when he told the good people of Ecuador, "You can't come to our country illegally." The Washington Post said, and I quote, "Our country is full. Trump's declaration carries far-right echoes that go back to the Nazi era." Now, same country, same group of people, 2 different administrations. Don't those headlines sound a little bit different, right? I don't think I'm going out on a ledge and say which headline sounds better than the other, right? One has the word Nazi in it, and one doesn't, right? And generally, people like things that don't have Nazis in them. Actually, I'm not even sure of that anymore, because I have never served in World War II, as far as I know. And yet, more than ever, you keep hearing the word Nazis brought up, like Nazi this, Nazi that, punch a Nazi, Nazis at NASA, Nazi Nazis, all that good stuff. I am so sick of hearing about Nazis. I really, really, really am. I mean, for being quite literally the worst group of people over the last 200 years, why do we keep bringing them up? Why do we keep comparing everything to a Nazi? Why do we keep saying this person's Hitler, this person's Hitler? Why not is it ever this person's Stalin, this person's Mao? Well, the China thing we're not allowed to, or we would all have to learn Mandarin and, go to work at a factory. But you don't ever hear it like about Stalin. And if we're talking strictly numbers, like if we're talking batting average, Stalin's batting much, much higher in terms of innocent people killed than Adolf is. I mean, for Christ's sakes, like the dude's first name's Adolf. Sounds like a fucking reindeer. Doesn't seem all that threatening. But anyway, I say this and I highlight this to talk about hypocrisy, to talk about double-sidedness. And goddamn, I hate double-sidedness, but I love their law. You know what I'm saying? Hypocrisy is easy or it can be strategic. Take for another example, an article in the Los Angeles Times that I came across earlier this week. Headline reads, "Some black parents see less bullying, racism with online learning and decide to keep their kids at home." Now, on its surface, that doesn't sound awful, and it sounds maybe true, right? I mean, there is still racism. I don't think, well, actually, there's definitely a few people who would deny that, but it's certainly gotten better from the time we could buy people, I would say. But then if you continue to read the article, which unfortunately I decided to, it essentially it's getting at this point, right? And what they're trying to say is that, I don't even know if this is true. I don't know how they just interviewed all the black parents in Los Angeles, but these black parents don't want their children to go to these predominantly white schools and experience racism, which I'm sure happens. And I'm sure it's that weird kind of suburban affluent racism where like kids named Tyler say the N-word because they bought a Young Thug album. That's gross. It ain't great. It ain't great at all. But really what this article is like getting at is essentially saying, hey, black kids and black parents, please don't come to our white schools anymore. Matter of fact, stay home. We'll give you broadband internet so you can't complain. And just please don't come learn with us. That's fun. Like that's truly like the message here. That the only thing, if you read the whole article and take away from it, is that they're asking black kids and parents to not come to white schools. Now, that's bad. Segregation is bad. And yet somehow it's being dressed up, it's being disguised, it's getting fucking makeup on it to look like this idea that not only do we care as good white folk, do we care about the concerns of black people, we're actually now going to make it sound like it's black people themselves who want to be segregated from white people, which I don't think is true. With most black people I met, at no point in any of the conversations with any of my friends, comics, like people that I've spent a lot of time with who didn't look like me, at no point in time during a conversation that we were having did they say, you know what, I miss my own water fountain. I never heard that shit once. And yet, fun fact, this article was written by an uber little liberal white girl named Laura Newberry. And that's the thing that I think like people are starting to see more and more is that these ideas that sound like we're trying to defend minorities from oppression, which is a noble and just cause. But a lot of times, like that secondary evil form of hypocrisy or double-sidedness, double-mindedness, it's generally like white people going out of their way to either be offended on behalf of minorities or, quite frankly, what I think, they're actually racist themselves because they, grew up in a society that was not around people less fortunate or minorities because they were born into this white, affluent Malibu type situation. So they're legitimately probably racist themselves, but you can't be called that anymore. That's almost like being called a Nazi. So what we have to do is disguise our insidious racism under the idea that we're actually trying to help, right? Which is, taken straight from the playbook of, the Democratic Party. The people, the original party of slavery, who are now somehow framing Republicans as the racist people. And don't get me wrong, the most publicly racist people probably statistically are registered Republican. That is an indisputable fact that I just made up and based on a gut feeling. However, you really need to be concerned or at least be suspect when organized powerful groups claim to have the interest of less fortunate people at heart. Because generally, what I'm starting to learn and just see and observe is that they're actually just trying to continue an exploitative cycle of those very same people. But in 2021, with the internet and social media, it's harder to pull that shit off, so we got to work a little harder to dress it up. And that's what the Los Angeles Times is doing when they claim black parents want to keep their children home from schools so they don't get bullied or experience racism, when in reality, the actual pragmatic outcome of this, if this was to actually be true, would be the fact that we're resegregating schools in 2021. 2021, folks. We're at this point, and they're almost good at it because they're kind of getting us to want to resegregate ourselves, which is an incredible feat because I don't know if you've listened to rap over the last 20 years, but that's where the culture is right now. And when I say the culture, I don't mean like Black Twitter, the culture. I mean like that's where pop culture is currently. You have to acknowledge as a white person that the majority of artistic contributions, from music to fashion, any art, right, over the last 100 years or so, most of it came from black artists, and then it was probably ripped off by white artists who, at the behest of larger institutions, had the white guy go sell it and go hawk that culture because that was way more palatable to the average person because we were coming off of the heels of literally slavery. And it takes a little bit, I would imagine, for a society to kind of shake off all the rust from the fact that we used to be able to own people. And which is why I'm serious in that you do have to take that into account. Everyone kind of is born, at the same starting line. It's just a matter of like when you're allowed to start the race, right? And if 2 people ago, let's say your great-grandfather literally was owned by a person, that is going to have some generational ripple effects and kind of put you behind the 8 ball at first. Now, that presents a tricky situation, right? Because any legislation or any idea that comes out that's trying to, address that 8 ball situation that you're behind of could maybe be of a good, noble idea, or is probably being used to once again dress up their long-standing racism, but this time make it a little bit more palatable for today's man, kind of like the new suits on sale at Men's Warehouse. So you need to be able to see through shit. And I don't want to say you shouldn't always assume the best in people because that would be a horrible way to live, right? If you just assume everyone's lying. But you got to consider it, and you got to consider it from the people who have the ability to speak and be on television, write articles for newspapers, which, believe it or not, is actually still, shaping a lot of public opinion. Everyone likes to act like newspapers are dead. Newspapers are old news. Newspapers are just to be pissed on by your cat who doesn't really love you. Like as if all of these newspapers don't have websites that don't have active Twitter accounts with like millions of followers. It's still very much a real thing. And honestly, you want to break that down and get conspiratorial about it, is just another angle potentially to have people think that don't really pay attention to what we're writing in our newspapers because people aren't really reading it anyway. So here's an article where you're going to be convinced to resegregate yourselves. Go enjoy your own private water fountain. It's luxurious. Don't fall for that shit. Truly, truly don't fall for that shit. Because I don't know about you, but I like people who don't look like me, who don't think like me, who don't share my beliefs. Because, A, how else do you get exposed to other ideas, which is kind of how you kind of become stronger in your beliefs of your own. But it's just fun. Like, I mean, do you want to go to an all-boys Catholic white high school? I sure as fuck don't. That would be awfully boring. That would just be insanely, unequivocally uninspired. The school dances would be terrible. It would just be awful. You don't want to, you need to, and it sounds almost corny, right? But like, you got to celebrate people who look and feel and are and think differently than you, because our differences are literally what makes us great, because we're all one people, at least in this country. At least that's what the motherfucking Mormons think. Oh, wait, they motherfucking don't. Let me tell you a little bit about the Mormons' background with people who are not of the alabaster variety, I shall say. So, Joseph Smith didn't like black people. Not the most shocking belief in the mid-1800s. But he also wanted to start a organization that was exempt from taxes and paid him to fuck 14-year-old girls. So his solution to stealing black people's money at the time was that if they were to join the Mormon church, eventually over time, because God doesn't like brown people, even though he supposedly made all people, follow that logic. Eventually, and I mean this literally, this is from the Mormons' belief themselves, God will make your black skin white because thank God you're here, thank God you're paying your 25%, right? Now, am I saying that Michael Jackson converted to Mormonism? Absolutely. Wouldn't that be funny if I just ended this whole episode on just the fact that like the groundbreaking revolution is Michael Jackson converted to Mormonism? No, he didn't convert to Mormonism, although he was interested in 14-year-old children, not unlike Joe Smith. Now, Joe Smith ended up dying, just to wrap up the Mormon thing, and then I'll get off it, I promise. Because you're not all bad people. I feel bad for a lot of you because you think you're doing the right thing. And like a lot of other religions, you're born into it, and it gets into your head, and it's dangerous. It's scary. It feels bad to even contemplate an idea that kind of splits from what you were taught all along. But like most people, you're good. Most people are good. But there's a few people, a few fucking unfortunately smart people who are not. And Joe Smith was one of them. Whether you want to acknowledge that he was intelligent, he obviously was, because how else do you convince a large group of people to form an organization that pays you, and then you also convince the U.S. government to not tax you on that people's money that you just stole, and then you convince them all to let you fuck their wives, which is, it's quite a feat. I mean, that's some like Herb Cohen level of negotiation. Now, Herb Cohen, master negotiator. I'm not even going to get into that because honestly, I don't know who Herb Cohen is. I just saw that on an episode of Silicon Valley. But back to the Mormons. So Joe Smith ended up dying when the townspeople showed up and said, "You got to die," right? So there's a big battle. He tried to escape this like militia. He even threw up like a Freemason hand symbol, I think, just to make sure there weren't any in the crowd who would come save him, because obviously his allegiance is to whatever group will have him. But he ends up getting killed. Enter Brigham Young. Now, Brigham Young is the guy that's named after BYU, the school that sometimes makes the tournament in March and then had one of their players, their best player, I believe, in like 2008 or 9, not allowed to play in the tournament because he fucked his girlfriend. The goddamn nerve of this guy fucking his girlfriend in college. Can you believe it? Me neither. Anyway, so Brigham Young, he was someone who said, and I quote, "If you leave the Mormon church, the only appropriate punishment is bloodshed." That's one. Another good one that he had is God hates black people, truly and literally. He said that. And he said all this while looking like a goddamn motherfucking Muppet. And I don't know what it was at the time. Let me just go on a little tangent. What was up with the mutton chop thing? Like, why did everyone like looking like a wolf who had given up on himself and developed, testicular cancer? I wouldn't follow anyone that had facial hair that looked like this. I would rather you have a powdered wig, and that would look more respectable to me. So there's a long, long history of the Mormon church not digging black people. It's so long that up until this 1970s, people, that black people were not allowed to become clergymen within the Church of Mormon, of fuck off saints. That's 40, 50 years ago, folks. Like most people, your parents or grandparents are older than when the Mormon church let black people join the clergy there. That is insane. There should not be any school of religious thought where your grandparents were around to say, "Nope, that didn't happen." You would think, right? Because that would prevent that from happening, because there'd be a bunch of people saying, "Hell no." Turns out that ain't the case out in Utah, because you're, clustered and, excluding yourselves from the rest of the natural civilized society. "Oh, but you're so polite, so we feel really good. And the Jazz are in the playoffs this year." Wake up, people. Stop giving into this shit. All this information is available, and if this sounds hateful, directed at Mormons, that's because quite frankly, it is. This is probably a little hateful, but it's not at the people. It's not at the good, honest, tax-paying Americans who get double taxed by their country and their motherfucking religion, and are told if you leave, hey, there might be some bloodshed. Because I do feel for people, because I think a lot of people are trying to do what's right. I really do. I really, really, truly think that. But people are susceptible, and that's honestly, people are susceptible. It's not even a weakness per se, because people want to believe people because people think people are good, which is a good thing. We don't want to get rid of that. We don't want to take that out of people. But at the same time, there has to be this filter where you say, hey, mutton chop fuckface, why are you telling me I can't like, rap music? And then if they don't have a good answer for it, you just fucking smack them like Macron got Will Smith smacked. I don't know if you guys saw that in the news, but Macron, the prime minister of France, whatever like the president of France is, because regardless of what your country calls the leader, I'm just going to say president because Merca. Anyway, so Macron recently, he caught a smacking when he was walking out of some like building and there was a bunch of fans outside, people with signs. He's a famous guy who ended up marrying his babysitter when he was a teenager, but I digress. So he goes to like shake hands, kiss baby, slap necks. And one guy's like yelling something to get his attention. And this Frenchie leans in and then just catches the meanest Will Smith smack to the face. And then obviously the French, Secret Service jump on the guy and don't really do much else because let's face it, they're French. Their time in the sun has come and gone. But these are the type of people that claim to want to, like, take Macron again, for example. So he recently gave a speech in which he said that we need to stop hate speech, right? We need to protect people from evil words. Evil words and mean words are almost like a spell, right? That's a spelliamus. We can't say these things. Meanwhile, the dude literally is married to who was his babysitter when he was 12 and she was in her early 30s. Which is, again, another example of hypocrisy. You can't say you're a good person who cares when you're fucking your babysitter. And let's not even get into his wife, who was a babysitter fucking a baby. Now, again, probably a jarring thing to hear, but I'm sure the Mormons are used to hearing about it. Because, earlier, Warren Jeffs, the guy who said, hey, you're not going to take all my wives. I'm just going to head down to New Mexico and keep fucking. I literally respect him more than Macron, who is fucking his babysitter, but he's worried about mean words, or Brigham Young, who had, despite incredibly awful facial hair, even worse ideas about, people that weren't white. Because if you're going to be evil, at least be public about it so we can know. And that kind of relates to like hate speech and words you don't like, right? You don't want people to say mean things, but you shouldn't not have the ability to say them. Because that generally means the people who are making those laws, preventing you from what you're allowed to say, are saying the most atrocious shit behind closed doors, who are actually the ones who hate people that don't look like them. Because how do you know what people believe? And how do you, let me rephrase. How do you know who's a piece of shit unless you let the piece of shit have the legal right to say, hey, knock, knock, guess who's here? I'm a piece of shit. That is fundamentally important. That's almost what prevents hypocrisy, right? The ability to say how you feel. When you tell people how to say your feelings, what you're doing, in a way, is telling them how to feel, and then you're also giving a select few an ability to then decide how everyone feels. And whenever a small group of people can decide anything for a large group of people, boy, is that a recipe for a good and proper fucking, right? Now, that's something that I used to think was pretty simple. Like, I used to think everyone was for free speech. I used to think I wanted to move to Canada because, honestly, I don't even know why I thought that. I like colder climates. That's about it. But, like, you look into Canada. They don't have free speech. They're not allowed to say whatever they want. There was a comedian last year in Vancouver who literally was arrested and charged with a fine, spent like a night in jail because like he was doing a show and a couple of lesbians were heckling him. Now, the fact that I didn't need to say they were lesbians, that doesn't affect what they said. That doesn't make their words any more or less important or valuable or not valuable at all or full of shit. It truly doesn't, because you can say whatever you want. Not in Canada. Not in Canada you can't. And the guy who was a comedian on stage dealing with hecklers made a joke offhand quickly about them being, rude lesbians who don't have fun and just, drive Subarus and wear Crocs and have bookstores no one goes to. I'm sure it was something that mundane. That guy gets off stage, a la Lenny Bruce, is immediately apprehended and thrown in a Canadian jail, which, albeit probably can't be that bad, probably has a couch and, shit like that. It's a Canadian jail. Now what that sounds like is a government trying to, prevent bullying, right? That sounds good. You don't want someone to get their feelings hurt, but you shouldn't want to hurt someone's feelings. that it shouldn't be the government telling you can't hurt someone's feelings, because quite frankly, some people deserve to have their feelings hurt. America really hurt Hitler's feelings when they said, hey man, you can't kill all the Jews. And he went, oh, because I really wanted to. That, you see what I'm saying? Like, you need to want to do good. You shouldn't be told what is good. That generally is when someone's really trying to sneak a bad thought into your head. Now, so Canada, this really polite place that doesn't have free speech, wants everyone's feelings to be heard, is led up by Prime Minister bisexual Justin Trudeau. Now, for those of you who do remember, Justin Trudeau, who cares about everyone, doesn't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and quite frankly just loves everyone equally, went to several Halloween parties in blackface. Not one, which... not like that's, cool. It's not like you get one get out of jail free blackface card. He went to, it must have been like the whole time he was in college, his thing. He was like the blackface guy, right? Like, there are so many pictures of this dude in a dashiki with blackface, in a hijab with blackface, in, any other culturally misappropriated for, and I don't even necessarily know if that's a thing, but we'll maybe talk about that. He's telling you can't bully people, you can't use mean words. Meanwhile, he's showing up to perform at a minstrel show. Like that, if that ain't double-minded, folks, I mean, that's two-faced. Quite goddamn literally, right? I mean, man's got a white face and a black face. Not unlike Michael Jackson, who probably joined the Mormon church, just to address that. But that's what I'm talking about, is that anyone who tells you what you can do, what you should think, what you should not say, they actually think the things that you probably don't even agree with. Case in point, take Hunter Biden, for example, who's on an apology tour. He's getting a whole bunch of, as of late, like sympathy from the public because, who doesn't end up being the son of a vice president who smokes crack rock in China on the board of government-controlled, companies that spy on Americans. But we're all like super sorry for him because he was smoking Parmesan cheese. Like, that's like we're supposed to feel bad for that guy. A couple months ago, it was not even a couple months ago, actually, a couple weeks ago, it was revealed that he had used the N-word just super liberally. I mean, like Paul Mooney levels of N-word with his lawyer going back and forth, exchanging some funny texts. Like, here's one. Hunter Biden, when talking to his lawyer, you better not be overcharging me for Hennessy money, my N-word. Now, while that is just awful, I mean, not even kind of funny, not even like amusing, this is a guy whose dad is telling everyone, hey man, like, we all gotta get along, man. Like, will you shut up, man? I'm trying to tell you what to think, man. Because I'm man, he always says man for some reason, which is kind of a black thing. Anyway, these are the people going around telling you what's good, what's bad, while they're smoking Parmesan, dropping N-bombs with their lawyer covering up their fucking crimes. Where's the laptop? Anyway, these people need to, I don't even know if they need to stop, to be quite frankly, because they're not going to. And it's not like we get rid of all the hypocrites, we round them up, we get them stoned, not like, the good stoned, like the bad stoned. That's not going to stop hypocrisy, because like we talked about, hypocrisy a lot of times stems from what's convenient, because it is not always easy to be infallible. In fact, the word infallible is fucking hard to say, right? Like infallible. You say that a lot. Eventually, it's going to lose all meaning. But if it's hard to say, it's hard to do and put into action. And it's hard to stick by what you believe because you're going to be tested. That's just what this shit is. It's spiritual warfare, people. Whether you want to admit it or not, that's what this is. People are always trying to get a leg up on other people. Whether you're China, whether you're, racist white people disguised as very far left progressives, all people are trying to do is beat other people. Unless, of course, you're a little bit enlightened and you actually realize we're all one person. Not in like a white person Buddhist sense, but in the fact that, take it like from a country standpoint, right? We all love to say we're the American people. And yet, almost every group, media outlet, organization, cable news channel, website, Reddit forum is trying to convince you that there are these people, there are those people. When if we all treat, man, it almost sounds cliche. And I get this feeling every time I come to a conclusion that is cliche, where I'm like, why was I fighting this the whole time? But everyone will be as good as you if you treat everyone like you. That's a simple ass rule. It's almost like it's the golden rule, one of the universal laws in most decent religions, right? So just think about that next time you're getting fed spoon-fed bullshit, because people are good people. They really are. Even the bad people trying to pull this shit were, and I believe this at some point in time, probably good people, because everyone generally is. If take the Mormon Church, for example. If they're a religious group and they believe in a God, which I don't even know if the people at the top actually do, if God made everybody, he didn't make some bad people, because that doesn't make any sense. That would be kind of sadistic. Like, what is he doing? Playing a video game? That means that because we have free will, which some people will try and argue we don't, but those people are trying to get control over you, newsflash, that means we're all susceptible to anything. Influence, words, thoughts, ideas, good, bad. And every single day, we have to decide what we want to do. Do we want to do good? Do we want to do bad? And unfortunately, it's generally easier to do bad, because bad is seductive. Bad feels good physically, immediately. It's gratification right out of the gate. But ultimately, it's not going to work. You're not going to end up either in this life or the motherfucking next in a good place, or at least on your deathbed. You're probably not going to feel like, man, that was a good use of time. You're not. You're just fucking not. I'm sure Hitler, at the very end, whether he died in, his bunker with a fucking revolver in his head, respectably, or he fled to Argentina, I'm sure once he wasn't in charge, he was thinking like, I might have gone too far with this one. You know why? Because it's easy. You have a nice, simple, happy, fun life if you don't hate people. And if you just maintain who you are. And it is not easy to figure out who you are. That's some exhausting shit. That requires a lot of eating, a lot of praying, a lot of loving, a lot of, traveling pants and sisterhood. It's not an easy thing to do. But what you should do is recognize when people are trying to tell you who you are, what you are, why you are, especially why you are. In case in point, again, Mormons, they tried to say, Jesus was an American. He hated black people. Let's kill all the Native Americans and the governor of Missouri. Now give me all your money. That I, honestly, I don't know how that's slipped by a few people. And another thing, and then I know I said I was done with Mormons, but I'm motherfucking not. I'm sick of y'all. Another thing about Mormons, all of the high-ranking people, all the, the real top of the, cream of the crop type Mormons, they all leave. And you know what the most popular religion is that they decide to go join? Scientology. Can't make that up. Literally Scientology. If your religion is so similar to Scientology, we have very, very big problems. You are a gullible salamander of a bitch if you think, hey, you know what? This Mormon thing is getting a little freaky. Let me go take it over to conservative, palatable, believable Scientology. Started by L. Ron Hubbard, the most published author of science fiction novels in American history. Fun little fact for you. Now, Scientology, we all assume is bad, right? Unless you are a Scientologist, which literally I will pray for you. We all agree Scientology is bad. I mean, look at Leah Remini on CNN. Look at any HBO doc. It's all evil. They keep them away from their families. They take all their monies. They control every part of their lives. Where is David Miscavige's wife? She's probably motherfucking dead. That's all bad. But the reason we're cool with that is because, it was deemed by these media outlets, by Time Warner and HBO, by Cartoon Network News, that it's bad, right? It's not all that different from Mormonism. In fact, literally, according to some Mormons, it's a more conservative religion. But for some reason, we're okay with the Mormons because, you can ski there and people are nice. That's not enough of a reason to give them the state of Utah, right? You would think. I would really, really hope. But it turns out that's not the case. And it's God damn it, were they good at this? Because, you never want to be someone shitting on religion. You don't want to pick a religion and say it's wrong because ultimately, gun to your head, you don't know. You don't know. Everyone's religion is weird to every other person because religion is weird. I mean, it's attempting to give an answer to an unanswerable question. But we're all going to find out eventually one way or the other. And I guarantee you, from the bottom of my heart to the tip of my dick, the answer is not going to be Joseph Smith was right. Right? I mean, come on, people. Elohim? Fuck. Yeah, just what? Fucking. this Mormon thing, man, it's really become a trigger for me lately. And I guess it's because I was just really duped, because I was someone, and still am, I truly still am someone who respects everybody. And that's why I don't say fuck Mormons. I don't think fuck Mormons. I feel for them. They're good people. They're generally more polite than a lot of different groups of people. But fuck Mormonism. Fuck the religion started by a guy with a fake name who fucked several 14-year-old girls all at the same time. Fuck that thing. And that thing is seen as a comparable cousin, sister, or sister fucking cousin in this instance, to Scientology, which we all acknowledge is bad. It's almost like Scientology was deemed the scapegoat religion, so the Mormons can keep recruiting people from Ancestry.com and baptizing fucking dead people just to boost their numbers. But at the same time, I don't hate all Mormons. I voted for Mitt Romney for president, literally, in this past election when he was not running for president, because I like his policies. I like what he says. He has a great track record, because I can separate the two. And that is motherfucking important. The separation of church and state, even if you're a devoutly religious person, is a great thing, because religion is deeply, deeply fucking personal. It is as personal as anything else in the world, right? And when you intertwine that with legislative bodies, with governments are supposed to have free people. And I know some countries don't agree with that, i.e. China. Don't kill me or make me learn Mandarin. But they are. People are supposed to be free because people have free will. If you didn't have free will, we wouldn't be free. If you weren't free, we wouldn't have free will. Do you see how those two are synergenic? Now, religions that, I don't even want to use the word religion, but groups that try to tell you you are not free to do this, you are not free to do that, that tell you what you can't do, rather than tell you what you should do, those people are lying. They're lying, they're motherfucking lying. That is the message here. You should hate the double-minded. But fuck, I love their rules. I love their laws, because they give you something to talk about. And if you have a podcast, you got to talk about something. And today, I just ripped Mormons to fucking shreds. Now, that being said, I still like Bryce Harper. You know what I'm saying? Bryce, if you're listening, honestly, please just take note and get the fuck out of there. But it ain't the people, folks. It's the same reason like people are perpetuating, segregating our schools again, because the people who are putting that idea out there, the fucking Laura Newberrys of the world at the LA Times, I guarantee you that bitch is racist. I will go so far as to guarantee you that bitch is racist. And I know that's the same sentence, but I really wanted to hammer that shit home, because she does not see other people equally. So instead of telling other people, hey, you ain't equal to me, which she can't really do anymore, I'm going to use my wit, my skill, my ability to make you think this is actually what you want.